I'm Rosalie, a 46-year-old working mom. I've been married to my husband Peter for 23 years, and our son Thomas is all grown up now. Peter and I live not too far from my childhood home, and we visit my in-laws and my dad from time to time. My mom passed away about 5 years ago, and only my dad is left. But my brother Randall and his wife Matilda live with him, so I've not been overly concerned. Randall and Matilda don't have kids, so it's just the three of them at the house. They've been living there for a while and seem to get along without much fuss, but peace was short-lived after my mom passed. About a year ago, we found out that my dad has dementia. My dad retired at 70 and was always a workaholic, so I had my concerns. The loss of my mom may have been a trigger. His symptoms gradually worsened until Randall finally took him to the hospital. I reached out to Randall and Matilda to see if they needed help, but Randall simply said, "Matilda's got it. Don't worry about it." I initially thought it'd be okay if sister-in-law could look after them, but deep down, I had one nagging worry. Randall and sister-in-law aren't exactly kind to my parents. Actually, they're not kind to any of us in the family. I remember during a visit back home, a neighbor told me that sister-in-law was bad-mouthing my deceased mom and dad to others. The neighbors who've known my parents for years didn't buy it, but people in sister-in-law's age group seem to believe her, and she talks about me too, saying things like, "She leaves all the caregiving to me, but only wants to offer her 2 cents. Neighbors who were concerned told me about this, even though I don't live with them and only visit occasionally. When we discovered that Dad had dementia, I tried to check in and spend time with him. At first, sister-in-law accepted my involvement without comment, but then she started to say, "Why are you coming back so often? Keep out of it. You're married now. It's annoying." I struggled with keeping the right distance from sister-in-law and eventually decided to limit my visits home. I figured if something happened, they'd let me know. So I've been only making a weekly phone call to check in on Dad. I realized this was a mistake very recently. One day, like always, I called Dad to ask about his well-being. Though he sounded fine, his tone was undeniably down. "Dad, you sound a bit down. What's wrong?" After a brief silence, Dad let out a heavy sigh.
"Well, it looks like it's going to be another snowy winter."
We live in an area with a lot of snow, and every year it piles up. This can be hard for elderly people living alone, who can't clear the snow and may get stuck at home. Of course, some of the younger folks helped with the snow removal, but that's not always enough. I looked out of my window and noticed it had started to snow lightly. "Don't worry, Randall and the others will probably shovel the snow. You'll be fine." I thought Dad's concern must be about the snow removal, but he sounded unconvinced. I asked again, what was bothering him?
"Well, it's cold inside the house."
"Why don't you turn on the heater?"
"Matilda gets mad if I use the stove. Says it's expensive. What with the electricity and the cost of fuel going up."
I was shocked to hear this. Yes, the cost of living has increased lately, but it's cruel to live in a cold house in a snowy region, especially for an elderly person. I mean, Randall and sister-in-law are at work during the day, so maybe they don't know how cold the house is. But Randall grew up in this area. He should know better. I hung up with Dad and called Randall.
"Come on, I'm at work. Stop calling me."
When Randall picked up the phone, I could hear his quiet tone and picture him shrinking into himself. "Sorry to bother you. I was talking to Dad earlier, and he said he's not even turning the stove on during the day." So I was concerned. A sound like a tisk came from the other end, and Randall sounded like he was fed up.
"Dad said he's fine. Stop meddling in how we handle things. Matilda's getting annoyed, saying you're too nosy."
"I'm sorry." Randall's irritation was palpable, even through the phone. Left without words, the conversation ended abruptly when he hung up on me. Staring outside, I noticed the snowfall had intensified since earlier. I thought about checking on Dad, but a glance at the clock showed it was almost 4 p.m. Assuming my sister-in-law would be home soon, I decided against causing more friction and chose not to go. Days later, the snow continued to pile up, transforming the outdoors into a picturesque winter wonderland. Houses with little activity were buried in snow, and cars were quickly getting covered overnight. During the day, I joined my neighbors to shovel snow, making walkways easier to navigate for everyone. Thankfully, snowplows managed the roads, so that wasn't a concern. Shoveling snow really boosts my confidence in my physical abilities, and it's also a great workout. Sure, it's tough, but it's a good opportunity to interact with the neighbors. "Hey, Rosalie, I saw Lawrence standing in front of Randall's house the other night." "What?" As the neighborhood ladies and I are all gathered, happily shoving snow together. The woman next to me looks concerned and starts to talk. She's a nurse, working the night shift in a 3-shift rotation. She says she usually gets home around 1 a.m., and that's when she saw it. I'm shocked, and my mind starts racing. Could it be that someone is wandering around late at night? I haven't heard anything like that from my brother and sister-in-law.
He was dressed more like he was ready for bed. It's not just a cold he could catch, it's downright dangerous.
The woman shared this with a grimace, and it felt like she was holding back. Thank you for letting me know. I'll check with my brother and sister-in-law. I didn't have further answers at that point. Once the shoveling was mostly done, and everyone retreated indoors, I called Randall again from my cell phone. But since Randall isn't picking up, I have no choice but to give my sister-in-law a call. "Hello?" She picked up right away. "Hey, is now a good time?" "What? I'm busy." Clearly, the tone in my sister-in-law's voice doesn't sit well with me. I can tell she finds the call bothersome. "I heard from a neighbor that Dad's been outside in the middle of the night." "What?" "Oh yeah, we noticed him going out, and it's really troubling us too." At first, she didn't seem to understand the gravity of my question, but eventually gave an exasperated answer. "Is it safe? I mean, he's not consistently outside at night, is he?" Though I never suspected they'd neglect him, my worry for Dad had me pushing for details. My sister-in-law yelled something through the phone and promptly hung up. I couldn't make out what she'd said, but figured everything was probably okay, so I decided not to call or check up any further. But this issue made me worry about my brother and sister-in-law's well-being. If Dad is wandering at night, they're probably not getting much sleep either. I found myself thinking about different options. Should we consider placing Dad in a care facility? That night, I decided to discuss it with Peter.
"Well, you might have a point. Maybe it's not best to keep leaving it up to Randall and his family,"
Peter said. The more we talked, the more Peter seemed open to the idea of a care facility. I could still visit Dad, but if he's going to wander, I'd have to quit my part-time job. I would feel safer if Randall and I both contributed to the cost of a care facility. "Exactly. I'll talk to them about it," I said. After hearing Peter's response, I decided to bring it up with my brother and sister-in-law later. But then something unexpected happened that night. Around 2 a.m., the house was quiet. Peter and I were fast asleep. Outside, snow had piled up again, despite our clearing it during the day, snuggled in our warm bedding to fend off the cold. I woke up, sensing something unusual. I listened carefully, and it turned out to be the doorbell ringing through the house. I checked the time. It was past 2 a.m., and even sticking my hand out of the covers, the air felt cold. This was no time for visitors. Feeling uneasy, I nudged Peter awake. The doorbell continued to ring. "Hey, seems like someone's at the door." Peter's eyes fluttered open a bit. Sensing my whisper, he seemed to grasp the urgency, and his eyes widened. Then he sat up to confirm that the sound of the intercom was indeed audible.
"Don't move, I'll go check,"
he said. Peter put on a warm jacket beside the bed and went out of the room. Peter had told me not to move, but I couldn't help worrying about him. I gripped my phone and cautiously followed him to the front door. Before opening the door, Peter went into the living room to check the security monitor. I watched the entrance from a distance and felt a shiver of fear at the sight of a shadowy figure.
"Hey, it's Dad."
Peter called out from the living room. Unbelieving, I rushed over and squinted at the faint image on the monitor. It was Dad. Are you kidding? Quickly, turn up the heat, I yelled. I quickly told Peter to warm up the room and then hurried to the front door. Upon opening it, I found Dad curled up and shivering just beyond the threshold. Dad, what are you doing out here? Come inside. I draped my own jacket over my shivering father and ushered him inside. Dad came in stumbling weakly and sat down at the entrance. Peter, help me. I couldn't lift Dad by myself, but Peter rushed over and helped me carry him into the living room. Hearing the commotion, Thomas rubbed his eyes and came downstairs from the second floor. Hey, give us a hand. Thomas saw Dad as well as Peter carrying him and quickly realized what was happening. He rushed back upstairs and came down with blankets and a comforter.
Dad, sit here.
Peter guided Dad to a chair near the stove. Under the light, I see Dad shivering, his pajamas soaked from the snow and his face pale. His lips have turned blue, sending a shiver down my spine. It's clear he's in danger.
Hey, warm up a hot towel, quick. Oh, we've got that big bucket, right? Fill that with hot water, too.
Dad's feet are bare, and not just his toes, but his entire feet are turning blue. Stunned by what I see happening to Dad, Peter efficiently starts giving directions. Thomas follows suit, taking action. Dad, what happened? I ask Dad, who sounds shaky, but seems like he can't talk properly because his lips are trembling from the cold. Without wasting a second, I grab my cell phone and call Randall right away. I immediately call Randall on my phone, but it's not him who answers. It's sister-in-law.
What do you think you're doing, calling this late?
Sister-in-law seems like she was already asleep and asks in a raspy voice. It's about Dad.
If you mean father-in-law, he's asleep. Don't call in the middle of the night.
I try to tell her that Dad is at our house, but sister-in-law cuts me off, shouting. This irritates me. She had claimed he was wandering around, but hadn't even checked on him. Can you please check? I suspect something's off with sister-in-law, so I deliberately ask her to confirm. She sounds annoyed, but I hear her shuffling and then silence. Moments later, she yells,
He's here. Just stop it already.
More noise follows, then silence again. Suddenly, I hear Randall's voice faintly in the background.
What's with all the yelling? It's Rosalie. She's such a nuisance calling at this hour. What's going on? She's asking about father-in-law. Ah, did you let Dad go outside again? Yes, I need him gone as soon as possible.
Hearing this, I immediately put my phone on speaker and placed it on the table. Then I grabbed Thomas's phone and hit the record button. Peter and Thomas listened intently to the conversation coming from my phone.
You're really crafty, you know, using Dad's insurance to pay off debt.
If I don't, I can't repay it. He's just a nuisance anyway, so useless.
Ha ha! Rosalie actually believes that Dad is wandering because of dementia.
I'm shocked at what I'm hearing. Tears of sorrow streaming down my face. I can't believe Dad doesn't have dementia and wasn't wandering at all. I've been fooled by my brother and sister-in-law. That woman is such a fool, but now, even if something happens to father-in-law, no one will suspect her. After hearing all that, I hung up the phone. I stood there stunned, not knowing what to say. Peter snapped me out of it, telling me to get it together. I snapped back to reality and realized I had to protect Dad. So I immediately called the police on my cell phone. After the police heard my story, they went straight to my brother and sister-in-law's place, who were probably at my family home. They were arrested on the spot. I was summoned to the police station several times, and I provided the audio recordings I had on Thomas's cell phone. My brother and sister-in-law tried to make all sorts of excuses. They claimed that Dad had dementia and a wandering habit, but there was no medical diagnosis of dementia, and tests proved that Dad was fine and had no reason to wander. Thanks to the evidence, they were charged with trying to take Dad's life and were sentenced to prison. After consulting with Dad, we decided to sell our family home. We changed all our contact information and never saw my brother and sister-in-law again. We all moved. When I asked Dad why he hadn't talked to me about the terrible situation he was in, despite not having dementia, He just said he didn't want to be a burden and didn't elaborate further. Dad was always a kind person, never the type to raise his voice even when he was verbally abused by Randall. And since Mom passed away, he's been like a living ghost. I wondered if he too wanted to move on. But Dad never spoke about it, so the truth remained unknown.
I'm sorry for being a burden,
Dad told Peter and me while we were cleaning up at the new place. Dad, I'm glad I could protect you. That will never happen again. At those words, Peter also smiled and said,
Exactly.
Dad gave a faint smile in return.